Bitcoin is speaking to us. Why are we not listening? Bitcoin is not telling us anything about Wall Street. Bitcoin is yelling and screaming. It's setting the alarm off. It's calling the bluff of the politicians. The politicians have accelerated their spending. The national debt has exploded by $850 billion in the last 90 days. These people are spending faster now than they were 90 days ago. Bitcoin is telling us, pay attention. The politicians are destroying the future, and that's why it's going up. And so during that same 3-month period where the politicians have added $850 billion to the national debt, Bitcoin is up 44%. Bitcoin is telling on the politicians, we're just all being too dumb enough to listen. I told you guys a couple weeks ago, sideways summer is over. We're going to come out of hibernation. Bitcoin will start going up in the next couple of weeks because it is time. I talked about how the halving occurred earlier this year. For about 6 months, we go sideways, and then this thing wakes up and up we go. And guess what? That's exactly what happened. Not because I got a big brain. We all know I got a small brain, but because if you look at all of the market cycles before, it takes about 6 months for that supply shock to kind of work its way out. And then you start towards the end of the year getting this demand increase, which we're seeing right now. And then it happens to overlay with a easing monetary policy. Of course, the asset is going to go up. And so predictable. Now, what is most fascinating to me is I am shocked at how fast it is going up. So I went back and I looked in 2020 and I said to myself, I remember that Bitcoin went up in November through March of 2021. And I said, but I don't remember the numbers. Let me go do some detective work. Bitcoin in the first week of November was about $15,000. By March of 2021, Bitcoin was at $64,000. That is massive appreciation in 5 months. And so I said to myself, well, what happened between the first week of November and the end of the year? Bitcoin went from 15,000 to 30,000. So Bitcoin's price doubled in the last 2 months of the year in 2020. I think that at the current pace, I extrapolate out with my little math on my Excel sheet, Bitcoin is actually on track if it continues on this path to double by the end of the year. I'm not saying it's going to happen. I'm just saying based on the first 10, 12 days of the month of November, given the price appreciation we've seen so far, that is the trajectory it's on. And so what ends up becoming really interesting is that these candles, these days of appreciation, Bitcoin was up yesterday 13%. We're not talking about a $100 million asset. We're talking about an asset that is worth more than $1.5 trillion, is up 13% in a day. And the craziest part is there was no news. It's not like somebody that no one had ever heard of before was announcing they bought Bitcoin, or the Bitcoin Corporation was coming out and announcing earnings or anything like that. Instead, this is simply Wall Street realizing that they are underallocated to Bitcoin. And so they start buying. As they buy, it brings more attention. Bitcoin was the number one story on CNBC, Bloomberg, Fox Business, etc. yesterday. And so I sat down last night. I said to myself, this can't all just be Wall Street saying I'm underallocated. They've known about Bitcoin. The ETFs got approved almost a year ago. What the heck is going on? And then that little brain of mine all of a sudden had a stroke of an idea.
Oh, thank God.
A little lightning flash went off. And I said to myself, Bitcoin is speaking to us. Why are we not listening? Bitcoin is not telling us anything about Wall Street. Bitcoin is yelling and screaming. It's setting the alarm off. It's calling the bluff of the politicians. The politicians have accelerated their spending. The national debt has exploded by $850 billion in the last 90 days. These people are spending faster now than they were 90 days ago. Bitcoin is telling us, pay attention. The politicians are destroying the future, and that's why it's going up. And so during that same 3-month period where the politicians have added $850 billion to the national debt, Bitcoin is up 44%. Bitcoin is telling on the politicians, we're just all being too dumb enough to listen.
Now, do we not think that this price increase has anything to do with the fact that Trump was elected president?
Of course it does. Donald Trump has a reputation for making people rich. There are plenty of things that people don't like about Donald Trump. There's plenty of things people like about him. I'm an independent. I don't give a hell about your tribalism. Whatever side of the aisle you're on, knock yourselves out. I don't care about that. I just call it how I see it. When Donald Trump walks in the room, a lot of people think he's going to make money, and so am I. And so when Donald Trump got elected, asset prices took off. The stock market went up, crypto went up, many other assets all go up. Why is that important? Because if Donald Trump walks in the room and says, I'm going to the White House, and everyone thinks this guy's obsessed with the stock market. Well, if you put a president in the White House who's obsessed with the stock market is probably going to go up. That's his metric. That's his KPI. What you measure is what you move. And his measurement is the stock market. So he's going to move it higher. And so if the stock market goes up under Donald Trump, it reinforces the reputation that Donald Trump makes the stock market go up. And so investors are saying to themselves, I previously was operating in an uncertain environment. I did not know whether the executive branch was behind me or in front of me. They were a threat to my capital. They continued to talk about raising the tax rates. They continued to talk about implementing unrealized capital gains tax. They continued to pursue policies that hurt my portfolio. Despite that, the stock market is still at or near all-time highs. But now somebody is walking into the White House who is pro-business, who is pro-investor, and has a reputation for making the stock market go up. And investors now feel safety, and they are allocating capital and going risk on because they believe that Donald Trump is going to make the stock market go up. It's already happening. He hasn't even assumed office yet. Imagine what is going to happen for the next 4 years.
Yeah. Speaking of like the lack of clarity around the regulatory environment, the CIO of Bitwise, Matt Hogan, I think is how you pronounce his last name. He said, that's just shifted 180 degrees. We're now in a positive regulatory environment. We now have tailwinds from that. And that comes in the case of a market that was already in a bull market. So that's going to push us higher.
There's a difference between bureaucrats running the place and market participants running the place. And there's a lot of people who critique having a market participant in the White House and making the decisions of who's going to run these regulatory organizations. But what we know is that the market participants are going to be much more pro-market than the bureaucrats. When the bureaucrats get in there, look at across all of these regulatory bodies, look across the administration. There's a bunch of people who have never operated in the actual market. And so when you go and you listen to what they're saying, they're basically operating on academic theory. Mm-hmm. But when you go and you talk to a market participant, they tell you how it actually works. And so what always cracks me up is take, let's say, bond trades in America. I forget the exact statistic, but it's something like over 80% of bond trading in America still happens over Bloomberg terminals in the chat function or over the phone. An academic will sit there and say, well, obviously technology has been created and we're going to be able to trade these much more efficiently over the blah, 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 whatever. It's like, no, you go talk to the person who actually trades bonds on a daily basis. And they're like, we use Bloomberg chat or we use the telephone. There's no reason in the internet age that those are the two things that they would use, but that's what they use. And so understanding the nuances of the market is really important because if you don't understand the technology, if you don't understand the assets, if you don't understand how the markets work, how do you regulate them? And so there's always this balance, right? You don't want to just put a bunch of industry insiders into regulatory bodies and then they basically help out their friends. But you also need people who have an understanding of the market that can use the nuanced knowledge to be able to create rules that make sense. Mm-hmm. And so I think that right now we have never seen in my lifetime the American people as excited about government waste as we do right now. The fact that the richest man in the world, Elon Musk, is teaming up with Donald Trump and a whole bunch of other people, and he is saying we are going to slash government spending. There are people who don't even know how to spell government spending. And they are on Twitter right now saying, slash the spending. We've never seen this before. And so my guess is that you're going to put people in a room with the mandate to slash government spending, and they're going to do it. Then you're also going to see people who are saying, hey, we voted you into office because we want inflation to come down. We want housing to be more affordable. We want stocks to go up. We want you to protect our right to own Bitcoin and to self-custody it, etc. And I think that the administration, based on a number of different moves that they're making, number of the people that they're putting into certain places, they are taking that mandate very seriously. And I hope that they deliver on these promises.
And no matter what happens, I feel like it's good for Bitcoin.
Bitcoin's going up regardless of who became the president. But Donald Trump definitely is going in there saying, I'm going to be the pro-Bitcoin president. The big question right now is, will he actually deliver on the promise to establish the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve? The Bitcoin Strategic Reserve, there's been a bunch of different policies for it. But the idea is a central bank or a sovereign wealth fund, they hold different assets. And so central banks have been buying a lot of gold. Gold's up 35% this year. So why is that happening? Well, big pools of capital like central banks are buying gold. They're using it as part of their reserves. How are they actually going to store that wealth? None of them, for the most part, are using Bitcoin. And so this idea of a strategic reserve of Bitcoin is if Bitcoin is going to be really valuable and there's only 21 million of them, the United States should own some. Today, we have about 200,000 Bitcoin or so that we've gotten through seizing from different criminal cases, etc. And so Donald Trump made a promise that we were not going to sell any more of that. So that could be the establishment or the start of a strategic reserve. That strategic reserve is just Bitcoin is held on the United States government's balance sheet and we don't sell it. If it goes up a lot, great. If it doesn't, that's fine too. We already have the Bitcoin, just don't sell it. Now, somebody like RFK Jr., he made a promise that he actually wanted to implement a plan to buy more Bitcoin. If you look at Cynthia Lummis, senator, she has come out and she said, well, hold on a second. Why don't we buy 1 million Bitcoin? And we can do that over the next 5 years or so. Here's how much it's going to cost. Let's go not just keep the Bitcoin we have, but let's actually go buy Bitcoin, put it on the government balance sheet. If the United States goes and establishes a Bitcoin strategic reserve, it will kick off a global FOMO like we've never seen before. Because every single nation state will say, if you're going to buy it, if you're the biggest economy, if you're the one who is the global police and you got Bitcoin, I better have some too. And so it's fun in games when you've got individuals fighting over Bitcoin in circulation. It's even funnier and more interesting when you've got corporations and financial institutions. But the final boss is the central banks, is the sovereign wealth funds. And when you have people showing up with trillions of dollars in assets and they say, we're going to buy this asset, this thing will skyrocket. Now, the question is, are the cycles over? Are we going to get these massive increases in price and then these big drops? If you had asked people over the summer, they would have said, no, I think that we just kind of grind up slowly and there's not kind of these big blow off tops. Based on the price movement of the last 2 to 3 weeks, there may be bigger blow-offs in the future than there were previously. And so if you get these blow-off tops, you still are going to get market drawdowns. But I was asked on Fox a couple of weeks ago, they said, what is the headline in 2026? And I jokingly said, Bitcoin crashes to 100K. Because that was like a dream of people when Bitcoin was at 20K.
I mean, I remember how excited everybody was when it hit 30K.
And so if it runs up and then it crashes to $100,000, people will be like, oh my God, it's so much fear, whatever. It's not even there yet. But that's the type of thing that has happened in this market. And so I don't know how the future will play out. But what I do know is that the United States has an opportunity to be the leader on a global stage when it comes to Bitcoin. There's plenty of people who don't like Bitcoin, but I believe that Bitcoin will continue to be the best store of wealth available to anyone in the world. And so if that is true, and the United States needs to store its own wealth the same way that its people need to store their wealth, companies and financial institutions, then the United States should establish the strategic reserve. They should buy it, put it to the side, forget about it. Don't touch it. Don't trade it. Don't try to get cute with it. And instead, let's go operate. Let's go deregulate the energy industry. Let's go build all the things we need to do to make the United States this amazing place to live and to be prosperous. And the Bitcoin will take care of the Bitcoin and we'll be fine in the future.
So the government needs to be diamond hands, not scissor hands.
The United States is amazing at being bureaucratic. And so when you're bureaucratic, you have this deadlock or this gridlock that makes it very hard to make decisions. And so the same way that the United States is slow to make certain actions or kind of make certain decisions, once they buy the Bitcoin they put in the strategic reserve, I would not bet on the United States being effective enough to actually make the decision to sell it. And so my general thought process is the setting up is way more important than anything else, because once it's set, it'll be very hard to kind of stop the government from the direction of travel that it is, which is just simply hold the Bitcoin.